and we try to understand number 26 to 28. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Vasudevaya. Narayanam namaskritya
Narayanam
naram chaiva
Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam
narottamam
Devim
devim
Saraswatim Vyasam
saraswatim vyasam
Tato
tata
Udvite
jayamudire nashtaprayeshu
Nashtaprayeshu
abhadreshu nityam
Nityam
bhagavata
Bhagavata
sevaya
Sevaya Bhagavati
bhagavati
Uttama
uttama
Shloke
shloke
Bhakti Bhavati
bhaktirbhavati
Naistiki.
naistiki. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Niravidyat Shishna Vai Praja Ananda
Nirabhidyat
Amruta Arthina
Nirabhidyat Shishnoho Vai Prajananda Mrutarthina
Upasta Asit Kamanam Priyam Tat Ubhaya Ashrayam
Upasthita Sita Kamanam Priyam Tad Ubhayashrayam
Upasta Asit Kamanam Priyam Tat Ubhaya Ashrayam Utse Sruksho Dhatu Malam Niravidyat Vai Gudam
Utsi Srukshoh Dhatu Malam Nirbhidyat Vai Gudam
ततः पायु ततः मित्रः उत्सर्गः उभय आश्रयः
Tatah Payuh Tatah Mitra Utsarga Ubhayashraya
आशिसृप्सोः पुरः पुर्या नाभिद्वारम् अपाणतः
आशीसृप्सुः पुरः पुर्या नाभिद्वारमपानतः
तत्र अपाणः ततः मृत्युः पृथक्त्वम् उभय आश्रयम्
तत्रापान ततः मृत्यु पृथक्कत्वम् उभयाश्रयम्
निरवेद्यत् शिष्णोः वै प्रजा आनन्दम् अमृत अर्थिनः
निरभिद्यच्छिष्णो वै प्रजानन्दामृत अर्थिनः
उपस्थ आसीत् कामानां प्रियं तत् उभय आश्रयम्
उपस्थ आसीत् कामानां प्रियं तद् उभयाश्रयम्
उत्सिसृक्षो धातुमलं निर्विद्यत्वयि गुदम्
उत्सिसृक्षः धातुमलं निर्भिद्यत्वयि गुदम्
ततः पायु ततः मित्रः उत्सर्ग उभय आश्रयः
ततः पायुः ततः मित्र उत्सर्ग उभयाश्रयः
आशिसृप्सो पुरः पुर्या नाभिद्वारम् अपाणतः
आशीसृप्सः पुरः पुर्या नाभिद्वारमपानतः
तत्र अपाणः ततः मृत्युः पृथक्त्वम् उभय आश्रयम्
तत्रापान ततः मृत्युः पृथक्त्वम् उभयाश्रयम्
निरवेद्यत् शिष्णो वै प्रजा आनन्द अमृतर्थिनः उपस्थ आसीत् कामानां प्रियं तदुभय आश्रयम् उत्सिसृक्षोः धातुमलं निरवेद्यत् वै गुदम् ततः पायु ततः मित्रः उत्सर्ग उभय आश्रयः आसीत्सृप्सो पुरः पुर्या नाभिद्वारम् अपाणत तत्र अपाणः ततः मृत्युः पृथक्त्वम् उभय आश्रयम्। हरे कृष्ण।
निरभिद्यच्छिष्णो वै प्रजानन्दम् अमृतार्थिनः उपस्थासित कामानां प्रियं तद् उभयाश्रयम् उत्सिसुश्रुक्ष धातुमलं निर्भिद्यत्वै गुदम् ततः पायुः ततः मित्र उत्सर्ग उभयाश्रयः आशिसृप्सुः पुरः पुर्या नाभिद्वारमपानतः तत्रापान ततः मृत्यु पृखत्वम् उभयाश्रयम्।
हरे कृष्ण। Translation and purport by the Srila Prabhupada, Jagadguru Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thereupon, for sexual pleasure, begetting offspring, and tasting heavenly nectar, the Lord developed the genitals, and thus uh, there is the genital organ and its controlling deity, the Prajāpati. The objects of sexual pleasure and the controlling deity are under the control of the genitals of the Lord. Thereafter, when he desired to evacuate the refuse of eatables, the evacuating hole, anus, and the sensory organ thereof developed along with the controlling deity Mitra. The sensory organ and the evacuating substance are both under the shelter of the controlling deity. Thereafter, when he desired to move from one body to another, the navel and the air of departure and death were combinedly uh, created. The navel is the shelter for both, namely death and the separating force. Purport. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The heavenly pleasure for the conditioned soul is sexual pleasure, and this pleasure is tested by the genital. The woman is the object of sexual pleasure, and both the sense perception of sexual pleasure and the woman are controlled by the Prajāpati, who is under the control of the Lord's genital. The impersonalist must know from this verse that the Lord is not impersonal, for he has a genital on which all the pleasurable objects of sex depend. No one would have taken the trouble to maintain children if there were no taste of heavenly nectar by means of sexual intercourse. This material world is created to give the conditioned souls a chance for rejuvenation, for going back to Godhead. And therefore, generation of the living being is necessary for upkeep of the purpose of creation. Sexual pleasure is an impetus for such action, and as such, one can even serve the Lord in the act of such sexual pleasure. The service is counted when the children born of such sexual pleasure are properly trained in God consciousness. The whole idea of material creation is to revive the dormant of God consciousness of the living entity. In forms of other than the human form, sexual pleasure is prominent without any motive of service for the mission of the Lord. But in human form of life, the conditioned soul can render service to the Lord by creating progeny suitable for the attainment of salvation. One can beget hundreds of children and enjoy the celestial pleasure of sexual intercourse, provided he is able to train the children in God consciousness. Otherwise, begetting children is on the level of the swine. Rather, the swine is more expert than the human being because the swine can beget a dozen piglets at a time, whereas the human being can give birth to only one at a time. So, one should always remember that the genital sexual pleasure, the woman, and the offspring are all related in the service of the Lord. And one who forgets this relationship in the service of the Supreme Lord becomes subjected to the threefold miseries of material existence by the laws of nature. Perception of sexual pleasure is there even in the body of the dog, but there is no sense of God consciousness. The human form of life is distinct from that of the dog by the perception of God consciousness. Even in the matter of the evacuating stool, uh, the refuse is controlled as how can the living entity claim to be independent? Pranavayu continues the life and the apanvayu stops the living force. Both the vibration are generated from the abdominal hole, the navel. This navel is the joint from one body to other. Lord Brahma was born of the abdominal hole of the Garbhodakshaya Vishnu as a separate body, and the same principle is followed even in the birth of any ordinary body. The body of the child develops from the body of the mother, and when the child is separated from the body of the mother, it is separated by cutting the navel point joint, and that is the way of the Supreme Lord manifested himself as separated meaning. The living entities are therefore separated parts, and thus they have no independence. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitam Ena Tasmai Sri Gurave Nama Sri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Ena Bhutale स्वयं रूप कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकं वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरोः श्रीयुतपदकमलं श्रीगुरोन् वैष्णवाञ्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातं सगणरघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधा कृष्णपादान् सगणललिता श्रीविशाखान्विताञ्च नमो ॐ विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिनिति नामिने नमस्ते सरस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारिणे वाञ्छा कल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुवे एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्णा प्रणाम. Today we continue in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2nd, chapter 10. Bhagavatam is the answer to all questions, and you try to understand. Shloka Kramanka 26 to 28. In this in three shlokas, they're describing about the existed or has manifested the genitals and the the how the heavenly pleasure of for the conditioned soul is the sexual pleasure, and they again describe about the form of other than the human form. Sexual pleasure is the prominent without any motive of the service of the mission of the Lord. Uh, and then they're describing about the desire to move from one body to another, that novel and air of departure, death are combinedly created. All these points they are describing in three shlokas. Prabhuji will tell us in nicely. Hare Krishna. Pranam.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Time flies, and with time, we understand deeper and deeper meanings of what our life is like. And then we realize that at times, whatever we could have done and we have not done, we have a regret for that. And that is where Krishna, as merciful as he is, always helps us to avoid mistakes which can be avoidable mistakes. And that is why he himself comes as a Grantha Avatar, Srimad Bhagavatam. And especially in this 10th chapter, where Shukdev Goswami ji is continuing to describe how different bodily organs and functions manifest from desire of Supreme Lord. These three shlokas address three powerful aspects of material existence: the sexual generation, the evacuation and bodily wastes, and the birth, death, and the navel connection. So basically, these three shlokas make us understand the deeper meaning of sex, birth, death, evolution, and understanding the Lord's design behind human life. These shlokas reveal the deep truths about the purpose of material creation, human responsibility, and the soul's journey through evolution. So this starts with sexual progeny, purpose of creation, where Krishna, the description starts that the Lord develops the genitals and then the Prajāpati appears. So when the Lord desired to facilitate pleasure, procreation, and taste of heavenly nectar, the genitals manifested. And from them arose Prajāpati, the controller of generation. So whether it is genitals, whether it is pleasure, whether it is woman, the object of pleasure, or the process of begetting offspring, all function under the Lord's control through the Prajāpati. So this alone defeats the idea that God is impersonal. He has personal features and senses. And this also very effectively make it clear what is the purpose in material creation. The entire purpose of material creation is to revive the dormant God consciousness of the living. Therefore, generation of living beings must continue. And for this, the sexual activity becomes the impetus. And even this action can be service to the Lord. But only when children born from the union are trained in Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, Srila Prabhupada blindly states, begetting children becomes equal to the life of a swine. A pig produces a dozen offspring at a time. So mere reproduction is not special. What makes human life meaningful is God consciousness. And without God consciousness, it is animalistic. Dogs, goats, animals, they also have intense sexual drive. They too perceive the pleasure, but they have no God consciousness. Human life becomes distinct only when sexuality is connected to dharma and spiritual duty. Otherwise, it is simply lust, not love. It is an itch, not happiness. It is a source of anxiety, not joy. In fact, Prabhupada quotes the 7th canto, 9th chapter, 45th shloka, where it is clearly mentioned that sex is like rubbing hands to relieve an itch. The kripana, that is fool, they cannot stop itching, while the dhira, the sober person, tolerates and becomes free. So, what happens is this has created a heavy responsibility. The pleasure, it is mentioned in the scriptures, it comes from the thin liquid coating on the genitals. But it is always tied with great lifelong responsibility. If one cannot make the child Krishna conscious, parents suffer intensely. Wrong motivations, passion, lust, impulse, they lead to painful outcomes. A boy who shot students in school, the parents are convicted. Society filled with stimulations. The movies, the newspapers, the novels, the porn, the YouTube videos, the, what do we call nowadays, those 2 minutes, 5 minutes, reels. So decline of culture is due to uncontrolled lust. So without purpose, it brings material suffering. It can never bring happiness. In fact, nowadays we find such rampant abuse. Prabhupada in his lectures used to say that contraception and the blocking the purpose of creation, artificially stopping procreation through contraception, it creates a bottleneck for living beings who need birth to advance towards God consciousness. Population may drop in one place, but nature compensates elsewhere. And that is what we are finding today. The moment there is atheism and non-believing in the scriptural injunctions, we have seen that the adharmic population has increased and there's so much of terrorism everywhere. Bomb blast and so and so. So this is just compensation by the nature. So Srila Prabhupada makes a very strong statement. If I could have Krishna conscious children, I can have 100 times of pleasures. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur used to say. Like Bhakti Vinod Thakur, he had 13 Krishna conscious children. Prabhupada ji suggested 3 to 4 if one can properly train them. So the issue is not number. The issue is purpose and whether we have the capability and the capacity to make the children Krishna conscious, to make them aware what is their original position, to make them aware that they are not the body but spirit soul, to make them aware that the eternal position is of servitude. So whether they become Mayadas and remain happy in dancing on the music of the filmy tunes, or they become Krishna Das. Dance, but dance for the pleasure of Krishna. Sing, but sing for the pleasure of Krishna. Talk, talk for the pleasure of Krishna. And that is where it's a heavy responsibility on the parents, where most of the parents fail, including those who have got initiation in the system. And that is where we also forget the difference between lust and love, the real definition of compassion. Prabhupada clearly states that without purpose, the pleasure activities is animalistic. It is not love, it is lust. Because real love means people are suffering from lack of Krishna consciousness. We should help them. So when rightly used, it can help souls go back to God. And when wrongly used, it binds parents deeper into misery. So in every situation, there is a right way and a wrong way. If we do not hear about the right way, we suffer. So tolerating the each and developing a higher taste is very, very essential. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And the problem does not get solved there itself. In fact, if we look at any of our bodily functions, everything is dependent upon Lord. In fact, in one of the discussions, Maharaj was talking about evacuation and the illusion of independence. Here we see that the Lord next develops the evacuating pole, the anus. And its controlling deity is Mitra. And the function is of releasing the stool. So there's a powerful punchline here. Even the evacuation of stool is controlled. So how can a living entity claim independence? Even our waste disposal is not autonomous. Material nature supervises every bodily function. The smallest detail is arranged by the higher authorities. So independence is really an illusion. We are and will always be dependent upon Vasudeva, upon Vishnu. Even right from our birth. Like we talk about the birth, the death, the journey of the soul. When the Lord desired to move from one body to another, the navel, prana and apana were created. Pranavayu, it sustains life. And apanavayu, it ends life. Both originate from the navel region. So the navel is the joint connecting two bodies. Brahma emerged from the navel of Garbhodakshaya Vishnu. Similarly, a child emerges from the mother and is separated by cutting the navel cord. So this demonstrates that living beings are separated parts of the Lord. They possess no independence. Birth and death are fully under divine control. The body is created, maintained, and eventually stopped under the Lord's direction. Evolution is not of bodies, but of souls. So Darwin is wrong in thinking that the bodies evolve. So when Darwin says that monkeys evolved to be humans, Prabhupada said maybe his ancestors were monkeys, not mine. Prabhupada explains that bodies do not evolve. It's only the soul which evolves. All the species, the 84 lakh, 8.4 million, they already exist. There are so many Brahmandas, so many universes, so many planets, and they exist simultaneously. And the soul moves simply from one body to another based on desire. So evolution is actually the soul changing the apartments. So if you look, you can simply refute the Darwinism, because in Darwinism, extinction cannot be proven. Scientists have incomplete senses. Limited excavations cannot explain nature. Natural selection implies a designer. And that designer is explained in Bhagavad Gita 9.10 as nature is controlled by Krishna. Mama Maya Duratyaya. So evolution is soul's progression and not body's mutation. Human life is the chance for Krishna consciousness. The human body is made for waking early, clean habits, chanting in Brahma Muhurta, acquiring knowledge of Krishna, using culture to rise spiritually. Vedic classification is based on culture and consciousness, while Darwin's on body type. And Bhagavatam gives full information who God is, how he lives, how he creates the universe, how the soul transpirates. If we do not use this information, we remain stuck in birth and death without guarantee of next body. The solution is chanting and the higher test. Lord Chaitanya gave the practical path. Chant Hare Krishna, engage in Sankirtan. The Mahamantra is greater than prayer. It asks for nothing material. It only asks, oh Lord, please protect me so I can always serve. By testing Krishna consciousness, one rises above lust, fear, suffering, ignorance. So these three shlokas, they reveal that sex, birth, death, bodily functions originate from the Lord. All functions have sacred purpose when connected to Lord. Misuse leads to suffering. Proper use leads to liberation. Independence is illusion. Real evolution is the evolution of the soul, and human life is the golden chance to revive Krishna consciousness. So ultimate message is that every aspect of life, from generation to evacuation to death, belongs to Krishna. When used for him, life becomes meaningful. When used independently, life becomes easily. Hare